Hello, everybody. This is Jordan Pacheco from the Rad Trads podcast. I hope you're doing well, and happy Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. I hope you're able to get to Mass, and I hope it's a beautiful Mass and is full regalia in honor of Our Lady. I'm recording this before Mass, so don't worry. I'm not going to be a ragamuffin today too long. But this morning, I saw an article that I really wanted to just go through because it's very curious. And by curious, I mean it's kind of to be memed a little bit. So in the Atlantic, there is an article called How Extremist Gun Culture Co-opted the Rosary. And what really caught my attention, besides the, oh boy, here we go, is the tagline or the logline underneath it, which is, the AR-15 is a sacred object amongst Christian nationalists. Now, radical traditional Catholics are bringing a sacrament of their own to the movement. So automatically the Rosary isn't a sacrament. But I love how the tie-in, I've been noticing this more, especially on the secular left, right? This tie-in of this rise of Christian nationalism. And it's kind of honored that we traditional Catholics, even if it's a very twisted understanding of what traditional Catholicism is being co-opted into the movement. So I wanted to go through it, I think poke a little bit of fun. The author of this guy named Daniel Pennington. And so before we begin, I just want to, of course, make the cry, obviously, I'm a huge believer that Catholics shouldn't really utilize much social media anyway, but I also don't believe that you should message or threaten or bully or even troll or meme, whatever you want to say, people who we might have disagreements with online. I don't think that this guy is particularly malicious. Even if he was, I just don't really condone any sort of interaction with people who may be more adversarial. And so if you're one of those people who just really wants to do the right thing and I just have to go tell this guy a piece of my mind, no, don't do that. There's absolutely no reason to. Besides, it's going to be hard to because his tweets are protected. So it's like, what's even the point? All right. So also, this is the free article I got from the Atlantic. So don't worry. I'm not like going behind the paywall and like sharing it with everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Writer based in Toronto, Canada. So hopefully we can talk a little bit about church burnings and stuff because Pope Francis didn't up in the Great White North. Just as the AR-15 has become a sacred symbol for Christian nationalists in general, the Rosary has acquired a militaristic meaning for radical traditional or Rad Trad Catholics. On this extremist fringe, Rosary beads have been woven into a conspiratorial politics and absolutist gun culture. These armed radical traditionalists have taken up a spiritual notion that the Rosary can be a weapon in the fight against evil and turned into something dangerously literal. Well, judging by the last sentence, it must mean that we are sharpening our rosaries and they will be our ninja stars for the upcoming fight. By the way, just in case anyone wanted to know, and it will come up in the article later, as you can imagine, this is my battle rosary. It is gun steel blue, so looks like I am extremely radicalized and I really do want to go Deus Volt and take back Constantinople, which I guess I actually do want to do now thinking about it. He might be right about that point, which we'll get into later. But I'm not going to go push someone off a bridge right now. Their social media pages are saturated with images of rosaries draped over firearms, warriors in prayer, Deus Volt, God wills it, crusader memes, and exhortations for men to rise up and become church militants. By the way, I like doing this. I always like seeing what is being led to when it comes to these other links. So you can kind of get a sense of who am I talking to and what do they believe in. And this one, of course, links to an alt-right and medieval religions at the Berkeley Center, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because I've never really engaged the alt-right as a bunch of medieval monarchists, but here we are. But of course, that's Berkeley, the Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Very official. And as for this church militants down here, where do we go? We go to the University of Chicago Divinity School. And it talks about what the church militant is and how it's all terrible and whatever. Blah, 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 blah. Influencers on platforms such as Instagram share posts referencing everyday carry and GAT check. GAT is slang for firearm, just in case you want to know what audience this is skewed for. That includes soldiers, battle beads, handguns, and assault rifles. What's an assault rifle, Daniel? Tell me. One artist posts illustrations of his favorite Catholic saints, clergy, and influencers toting AR-15 style rifles labeled Sanctum Rosarium alongside violently homophobic screeds that are celebrated by social media accounts with thousands of followers. And here we go. Okay, so I said, okay, let's keep going. The theologian and historian Massimo Faglioni. So if you don't, or Fagioni, I don't know how to say his last name, but it literally translates to maximum beans, pretty much. Right? If you're on kind of a little more memey Catholic channels, this guy's not really not that great, I would say, of a theologian or historian, but whatever, has described a network of conservative Catholic bloggers and commentary organizations as Catholic cyber militia that actively campaign against LGBTQ acceptance in the church. Okay, so a couple of things. First off, are we talking about conservative Catholics? Or are we talking about traditional Catholics? Or are we talking about Rad Trad Catholics? I was under the impression that conservative Catholics and traditional Catholics were something different. But since we're going to go ahead and quote Maximum Beans over here, I love it. We go to LaCroix International. By the way, LaCroix International, I want you to remember the name of this paper. This is a French paper. Never mind the fact that Father James Martin, it automatically links to a thing with Father James Martin down here because Building the Bridge and Father James Martin openly advocates for sins that cry out for vengeance in the church. Just in case Daniel was ever interested in why Catholics are not down with the whole LGBTQ thing, it's because we love sinners and we hate sins. And we don't want people to go to hell over their proclivities to sin. This would extend not just to things like same-sex attraction. This would extend to people who are fornicators, heterosexual fornicators, pornographers, drunkards. There's a whole list. St. Paul is very, very nice about giving us a list. But anyway, we're not going to get into Maximum Beams right now. LaCroix International, that's what I was going to talk about. LaCroix it was a French paper. They were advocating for something recently that was not very good, but you can kind of go ahead and just see what they you can kind of see what they do, right? So I'm not going to get into them, but they're just like the National Catholic Reporter, aka the National Catholic Distorter. Stay away from LaCroix International unless you're going to, of course, buy the beverage. Moving right along, these Rad Trad Rosary's Weapon memes represent a social media diffusion of such messaging, and they work to integrate ultra-conservative Catholicism with other aspects of online far-right culture. I love the extremist language that we're all using. Everything is far right. Everything is extremist. Everything is ultra. What's the difference between a Rad Trad and a traditional Catholic? I don't know. Maybe one posts a meme more than the other one. According to Daniel, I think they're all the same. The phenomenon might be tempting to dismiss as mere trolling or merchandising, because for the most part it is. And ironical provocations based on traditional Catholic symbols do exist, but the far right's constellations of violent, racist, and homophobic online milieus are well documented for providing a pathway to radicalization and the real world terrorist attacks. So again, people need to do their research real quick. When I was a young man, which means I was in 2014, 15, and 16, I was very much involved in the intrigue, the difference of what was called the alt-light and the alt-right. One of the best articles on the alt-right, of course, was written by Milo Yiannopoulos, who was on Breitbart at the time, which was a conservative crash course to the alt-right or something like that. Really, really great article. But it's really funny because everything is far right now, even though an alt-right and all this other kind of crud. But generally speaking, because we have the names and figures of people who subscribe to particular sorts of ideologies, that doesn't exist. And now let's tie back to my boys, which are conservative, or not conservative Catholics, though those are my people. Hello, people. But let's tie that back to traditional Catholics, who tend to not be Christian nationalists. They don't tend to put America above everything. Lately, we've not been American exceptionalists by a long shot. We're extremely critical of America, usually in foreign affairs, right? Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. They tend to be isolationists, and they also tend to be monarchists. So we're dealing with political ideologies that are just so foreign to secular democracies like we have today that I don't think that that's being reprised. And obviously, there's not really a lot of evidence, I would say, to support what exactly he means by traditional Catholics. Real quick, I just want to point out this one. This online milieus are well documented, which links to a New Yorker article, so you can see where we're going. Online spaces that enable mass shooters. None of these mass shooters have been traditional Catholics, now have they? So that's kind of a big conflation. We may want to take back Constantinople one day in an organized crusade by the Holy Father. That's a joke, Daniel. Maybe. I don't know. We'll have to see. But are we going to actually go up there and shoot up a Planned Parenthood? No, we don't do this. By the way, when are we going to talk about the fact that our churches in Canada are being burned down and our churches here and our pregnancy centers here are being firebombed? Kind of funny how that works. The rosary in these hands is anything but holy. But for millions of believers, the beads, oh gosh, don't call them just beads, which provide that's French because he's sophisticated. An aide memoire for a sequence of devotional prayers are a widely recognized symbol of Catholicism and a source of strength. That's true. That's a good sentence. That is true. And many take genuine sustenance from Catholic theology's concept of the church militant and the tradition regarding the rosary as a weapon against Satan. As Pope Francis said in a 2020 address, there is no path to holiness without spiritual combat. And Francis is only one of many church officials who have endorsed the idea of the rosary as an armament in that fight. Well, looks like we had a decent paragraph. That's nice. Just teasing. In mainstream Catholicism, the rosary as weapon is not an intrinsically harmful interpretation of the sacramental, and the symbolism has a long history. In the 1930s and 40s, the ultramontane Catholic student publication J'essaie étudiante catholique, I don't speak French, regularly used the concept to rally the faithful. Yes, of course, by the way, yes, of course, like there are people who like put rosary beads on their firearms. This isn't exactly weird if you actually get the concept of what's happening here. But the modern radical traditionalist Catholic movement, which generally rejects the Second Vatican Council's reforms, kind of a weird aside, but okay, is far outside the majority opinion of the Roman Catholic Church in America. Well, if you want the majority Catholic Church in opinion in America, it's not very light when it comes to the practices such as a rosary or the doctrines or dogma of the church, I suppose. But when you want to actually get a consistency of what Catholics believe and how they believe it, yeah, I would probably recommend traditional Catholicism. Funny, weird thing. Also, I love this. Modern radical traditionalist Catholic movement. So when did the radical traditionalist Catholic movement become modern? Vatican II is a modern council. It only happened 70 years ago. But I love what makes a radical traditionalist different from a traditionalist? What does it mean to reject the Vatican Council's reforms? And we have an Encyclopedia Britannica thing on the church since Vatican II. And I don't know if you can see, but here's a nun down here who clearly doesn't have her habit on. So that's called I Don't Care. I'm just teasing. I'm not actually that uppity. This is kind of a silly article, as you can kind of tell. Many prominent Catholic bishops advocate for gun control. And after Uvalde's school shooting, Bishop Daniel Flores of Brownsville, Texas, lamented the ways that some Americans sacralize death instruments. Yeah, I mean, I would agree to an extent. I don't think that guns are like the be all end all end all. But what's funny is that I thought the message from the Uvalde school shooting, despite the fact that there might be some questions on how did he acquire so much hardware working part-time at Wendy's, but I thought that kind of the big thing was that the police, the government, the cavalry isn't coming for you. And they're certainly not coming to save your children. And that if you try to take matters into your own hands for the sake of your family, the government, the police, the cavalry might very well stand in your way. I thought that was maybe something to explore a little bit, but nah, we just need more gun control, of course. Thanks. Militia culture, a fetishism of Western civilization, and masculinist anxieties have become mainstays of the far-right US. And Rad Trad Catholics have now taken up residence in this company. Okay, couple of things. First off, number one, militia culture. Literally, it says in our Second Amendment, we fought an entire revolution to say the idea of a well-regulated militia will not, the right of the people to bear arms will not be infringed. So this isn't a fetishism of Western culture. Part of the reasons why all these other countries fall so quickly to extremist ideologies is because they don't have the means to defend their freedoms, their God-given rights. And again, I'm not like the most American that ever exists. I'm not an American exceptionalist, although I might have considered myself one in 2015. At least I was interested in people who said that they were American exceptionalists. But now I'm a freaking monarchist. Like I'm legitimately the oldest method of political and cultural thought there could be. It's not a far right thing. That's a goalpost move, right? I'm like everyone's grandpa now, who's like, the problem is that they dissolved the Austrian Empire for the sake of liberal democracy. People are like, what are you even talking about, old man? Their social media accounts commonly promote accelerationist and survivalist content. That just means like people who are like, yeah, it's going to end and it's just a matter of time, which is legitimately how every empire falls. I don't see how that's particularly controversial. And also survivalist content. Yeah, it's good to know that you like, especially because we've seen power grid failures in Texas and in California. We've seen the price of food and gasoline go up. Is it really that far-fetched to just have a little bit of preparedness today? Is it really that crazy? Along with combat medical and tactical training, as well as memes depicting balaclava-clad gunmen that draw on terror wave and wavecore aesthetic that is popular in far-right circles. That last part I take a major contention with. And of course it links to a Vice article, so you can kind of tell what his things are. Warcore, that's an interesting word. Warcore is a new streetwear. Gotcha. Hey, Daniel, another Vice article. Lovely. Hey, listen, I know this is going to sound crazy to you, but it's very clear that you haven't inhabited a lot of traditional Catholic circles and memes and groups because we don't do the whole balaclava clad gunman thing. We'll get later into Crusader memes, which you better believe we do. But the whole balaclava clad thing, that is not a traditional Catholic thing. That's not a Western Catholic thing at all. We'd much prefer our soldiers looking way more 1900s old timey or Napoleonic old timey and have our rosaries. But we don't believe in this like weird terror wave or war core thing. What are you talking about? But again, you'll notice that it's not really about Rad Trads. See, this whole last this last paragraph is entirely designed to tie in traditional Catholics with the far right, whatever that means nowadays. He's not specifying what we mean. Are we talking about the alt-right? Right? Are we talking about Jared Taylor and Richard Spencer? Who are we talking about? We're not talking about Charles Clone monarchists, are we? Yikes. Like such networks, radical traditional Catholics sustained their own cottage industry of goods and services that reinforces the radicalization. Rosaries are common among the merchandise on offer. Some made of cartridge casings, based, and complete with gun-metal finished crucifixes. Rad Trad Jordan over here. Look at this. Look how good of a rosary it is. Because it is our actual tool to fight against the devil. That's why because we're boys, guns look cool, Daniel. I don't know if anyone told you this. That sounds so mean. I'll get a drink with you. Like, come down from Toronto, eh? We'll have some fun. Some made from cartridge casings and complete with gunmetal finished crucifixes. One Catholic online store, which describes itself as dedicated to offering battle-ready products and manuals to stand firm against the tactics of the devil, a New Testament reference. That's very kind. Thank you for that. Sell replicas of rosaries issued to American soldiers during the First World War as combat rosaries. I know exactly what he's talking about here. These guys are my absolute heroes. Shout out to Battle Rosaries. That's this puppy right here, the combat rosary. Such a cool thing. Look at this stuff. It's awesome. It just looks good. And look what it says. It says spiritual ammo. But man, it was a good looking rosary. That's just a work of art, people. I don't know how anyone could hate that, honestly. In 2016, the Pontifical Swiss Guard accepted a donation of combat rosaries during a ceremony at the Vatican. Their commander described the gift as the most powerful weapon that exists on the market. That is so completely true, though. This, outside of the Mass, is our most powerful tool to combat evil. It doesn't mean we're going around whacking people in the head or in their ovaries with it, but it means that this I ascribe to the reason Roe v. Wade got overturned. And I think what's interesting about this article is we're getting a sense that the secular left is beginning to understand that actual Catholics are still in the fight, and that accounts for something. Because after Roe v. Wade got overturned, how much hate was put on Comey and the other Catholic justices, because it's a very, very Catholic meddling with the state thing. Moving on. The militarism also glorifies a warrior mentality and notions of manliness and male strength. Oh man, he's gonna hate when you read St. Paul. He's gonna hate it. This conflation of the masculine and the military is rooted in wider anxieties about Catholic manhood. The idea that it is in crisis has some currency among senior figures and lay organizations. Well, it is in crisis, and I'm glad that some senior church figures and lay organizations are worried about it. I think if you just took a general look at the Roman Curia, you can kind of tell that we have an issue of being light in the loafers. I think if you could look at the issue of the widespread of pornography and divorce and a lot of young men not having fulfillment in their life, I think that is a wider crisis of Catholic masculinity and masculinity at large. There are entire reports about young boys being placed on Ritalin because they were boisterous, and it turns out that was not the right diagnosis. So yeah, I think that it'd be fair maybe to be a little anxious about some of these things. I also think that we don't need to go overboard on it. Like, get married, stop looking at pornography, go to the gym, eat healthy, smoke a pipe, live your life, right? Pray, hope, and don't worry, as Padre Pio says. That is legitimately the solution to our crises of masculinity. Go to the church, embrace the sacraments, right? Go to the traditional Latin Mass. Don't go to a soy boy Novus Ordo one. I'm sorry, there are some of those out there, aren't there? Anyway, let's keep going. In 2015, Bishop Thomas Olmsted of Phoenix issued an apostolic exhortation calling for the renewal of traditional conceptions of Catholic masculinity titled Into the Breach. A pretty good video, by the way, which led the Knights of Columbus, an influential fraternal order, to produce a video series promoting Olmsted's ideas. Yeah, if you haven't seen these videos, yeah, I think that if you're kind of struggling with these things, I think that would be a good resource. But this is sounding way too positive. We have to get back. But among traditional Catholic men, such concerns take an extremist turn, rooted in fantasies of violently defending one's family and church from marauders. Okay, so gonna leave that one there. I would just like to say also, our churches are being firebombed and burned right now, so it's not really that far-fetched. Now, I wouldn't say we should fantasize about taking life and violence. I don't think that that's really the Catholic way. The Catholic way is one of defense. Our Lord himself says that we must love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us, which is why Catholics, whenever our churches and pregnancy centers are firebombed, don't go back and firebomb abortion centers, because we understand that the victory we got in Roe v. Wade was because of the rosary. It was because of the spiritual realities, right? Not the physical realities. And it is by grace of God that we've not escalated to a point on our side where there's a lot more Catholics who say we just need to go over there and break their stuff. That is not the Catholic way. That is certainly not the traditional Catholic way. You would know this if you inhabited, talk to maybe 5 traditionalists, honestly. The rosary as weapon also gives Rad Trad Catholic men both a distinctive signifier within Christian nationalism and a sort of membership pass to the movement. We'll get into this in a second. Again, what are you talking about with Christian nationalism? Who here puts the state above the church as a traditional Catholic? As the sociologist Andrew L. Whitehead and Samuel L. Perry note in Taking Back America for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States, that's a book, by the way, Catholics used to be regarded as enemies by Christian nationalists, and they still are. And anti-Catholic nativism runs deep in American history. It very much does. Today, Catholics are a growing contingent of Christian nationalism. Okay, well, what kind of Catholics? Again, in the circles I inhabit, it's not weird. I have Star Spangled Crown sitting on my shelf right here, which talks about the restoration of what an American monarchy would look like. That's not quite putting American values with a sort of church influence. It's a very different kind of thing. Again, we're talking about such a classical idea here that for people who can only understand the contemporary left-right, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative dichotomy, far right, no such thing as a far left dichotomy, it's too novel. It literally is like your grandma talking. Helping unite these formal rivals is a quasi-theological doctrine of what Perry and another sociologist, Philip S. Gorski, have called righteous violence against political enemies regarded as demonic or satanic. I love how this links to a bookshop, which is The Flag and the Cross. No, thank you. How White Christian Nationalism and the Threat to American Democracy. Yeah, this is why, again, traditional Catholics don't tend to be a part of this, because first off, a lot of traditional Catholics, I don't know if you noticed, me and Rudy, by the way, but we don't tend to be white. Fun fact of the day. In fact, congratulations to Rudy, because since he married a white woman, he has reduced the gene pool. So I'm sure that he definitely lost his card into a white Christian nationalism. And the threat to American democracy. Well, we're a republic. We haven't been a democracy, but democracy is not an ultimate good. In fact, I'd argue that democracy has kind of been pretty soy lately. Don't you agree? Regarded as demonic or satanic, be they secularists, progressives, or Jews. Well, what's a secularist and what are they usually related? Or Jews. I love how the Jews is thrown in here. Yeah, I guess there's a couple memes on Jews. I don't tend to do the whole Jew hatred thing, but I'm also not one of those believers that Israel has to be protected at all costs. Apparently that's an anti-Semitic statement. I don't think it is. I just would rather restore the Holy Roman Empire and be done with it. By it, I mean, tangling in foreign affairs, not the entirety of the Jewish people. God bless them. God loves them. And they're going to convert to the fullness of the Roman of the Catholic Church at the end of the time. So that's really, really cool. And I can't wait to welcome them all as brothers. The hostility towards liberalism and secularism inherent in traditional Catholicism, that's true. There is a natural hostility towards these very dumb theories, is also pronounced within Christian nationalist circles. Yeah, probably that might be a kindred spirit. No longer stigmatized by evangelical nationalists, Catholic imagery now blends freely with staple alt-right memes, there it is, that romanticize ancient Rome or idealize the traditional patriarchal family. Yeah, it's not controversial to have a share of families. Look at this. Learn, speak, act, liberal arts in the moment. Classics in the alt-right, historizing visual rhetorics of white supremacy. So again, this part here is a problem. This is not a traditional Catholic thing. It doesn't make any sense. By the way, just in case anyone thinks I'm crazy thinking about this, consider when the Spanish stepped off their boats and saw all these pretty little native women lying around. Some of it was absolutely horrible and genocidal and everything, but not all of it was. And this became such a thing that the Pope issued the fact that if you have children with a native woman, you must acknowledge those children as your own. The Catholic Church has never had a problem with this idea of peoples not being humans because they look different. That'd be stupid. So how could you argue white supremacy in a Catholic church? How can you argue white supremacy when legitimately the most Catholic places in the world are South and Central America, which is, I guess, losing a little bit to evangelicalism, but we'll talk about that later. How can you talk about white supremacy in traditional Catholicism if it's very clear that I think traditional Catholics would be much more happy with the African church running the Roman Curia as opposed to the German church? So it must be something much deeper than skin color, must it, huh? Some doctrinal differences and divisions remain. Many radical traditional Catholic men maintain the hardline position that other forms of Christianity are heretical. That's because that's true, and hold that Catholics alone adhere to the one true church. That's true. It's a dogma, Daniel. It's called extra ecclesia nullius salus. It means outside the church there's no salvation. This doesn't mean that invincible ignorance doesn't exist. That is to say that someone who through no fault of their own has no way to understand the fullness of the truth in Christ. The example we use is, what do you say to a native in the Americas circa 500 AD? There's simply no way. And the answer is that God who exists outside the sacraments and God who exists outside the church may be able to save that person if they are following the natural law. We don't know how that judgment will look like. We know that everyone in heaven is a Catholic, but that doesn't mean that everyone on earth necessarily started out as a Catholic. But again, this is just a possibility. This isn't saying that there's a pass. If someone is to be saved outside the Catholic Church, it's not because of the other religious ideas that they inhabited, right? It's not because they were a good Muslim or a good Lutheran. It's because of the natural law of Christ and the illumination of his truth living within them. So, right, it's the short end of it. The easy thing is just become a Catholic and live the life of sacramental grace, die in a state of grace, right? Work off your salvation of fear and trembling, and this is how you can see heaven as a guarantee, right? Christian nationalism's nativism and its predilection for great replacement theory alienates some radical traditional Catholics who are not white or who are not born in the United States, and deep veins of anti-Catholicism persist among far-right Protestants. Oh gosh. Okay. Yes, I would say that again, great replacement theory, which is the idea. Well, I mean, I'm not even going to explain it. You all know it. You guys are clearly plugged into the internet, but obviously, yeah, it's not really a very Catholic thing. I don't think you can really find a lot of argument for, unless you're becoming a Catholic nationalist or which is a Catholic, but I'm going to be an Americanist, right? I'm going to be a good citizen, a good patriot, and this is what the makeup of the country needs to look like. I could care less what it looks like, not just because I'm Black, but because I'm much more interested in what goes on in people's heads and in people's souls. I'm much more interested in everyone in the world coming to the fullness of the truth than I am everyone looking a particular way. And as we talked about with David Gray, race doesn't even exist. Biblically, it doesn't make any sense. So let's keep going. Yet the convergence with within Christian nationalism is cemented in common causes such as hostility towards abortion right advocates. The pro-choice protests that followed the leaked early draft of the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization, which overturned Roe v. Wade, led to a profusion of social media posts on the far right fantasizing about killing activists. Such forums responded to Pride Month this year with extremist, homophobic, and transphobic groomer discourse. Okay, couple of things, Daniel, just in case we need to clear them out. First off, media matters for America. Oh yeah. Twitter should follow Reddit's lead and take action against groomer smears. Okay. So the reason why I click on these things is you want to see who's writing this and what do they link and what do they think is actually true. And so I love the groomer smear one right here. By the way, if those don't know, people who think that you shouldn't sexualize children, who don't like that kind of stuff, call people who do generally sexualize children as groomers. If you notice during Pride Month, there were a lot of kids who were allowed to see the most lewd things happening in drag shows. They were allowed in pride parades to dance on stripper poles and stuff, and the parents were just cheering them on. We've seen all this pornographic material removed from public schools. Oh, but it promotes acceptance and these kinds of things. It's pornography. It doesn't belong anywhere near schools. 5-year-olds who cannot determine if they're a flower or a dog that day probably have no business determining their sexuality. Fun fact of the day. But again, if you are somehow, if you call people who advocate for this stuff groomer, you're being anti-LGBTQ. I love it. I love how a decade ago we could have envisioned this, and now this is a very transphobic and extremist. I love extremist homophobic. So what makes Daniel? What makes a normal thing homophobic? But what's an extremist homophobic discourse? Now back to earlier here, it talks about how there's this open hostility towards pro-abortion rights advocates. We weren't the ones in the streets burning down clinics and stuff, Daniel. It seems to me like all the pro-abortion peoples decided to first stalk and threaten violence against Supreme Court justices, actually advocate for the destruction of the United States government in the way of overturning of the Supreme Court, abolishing the Supreme Court, packing the Supreme Court. Oh, and not to mention, there are legitimately open threats against Catholic churches. There are people here in Denver. There's a girl who vandalized the Cathedral Basilica and also interrupted a mass. And she's been charged for these sorts of things. So where exactly are all the traditional Catholics who are out here advocating for violence? Let's not talk about that, though. Let's not talk about the actual violence that happens and the actual advocation of violence that happens when it comes from the left. When it comes from the monarchy right, that's just a big problem. When they want to make a meme or say, hey, please don't have kids pole dance. That's not cool. Honestly, these people are unbelievable. Rad Trad networks are also involved in organizing rosary branded events that involve weapons training. So I love this, right? This is a really intriguing sentence. Rad Trad networks, are also, Daniel, you should watch our video, by the way, The Myth of the Rad Trad. I think that might help you a little bit. Are also involved. They sound so mean. I'm sorry. God forgive me. I'm just playing. This guy can take it. He's writing for The Atlantic, right? I'm not said anything against him. I'm just saying it's not very good. Networks are also involved in organizing rosary branded events that involve weapons training. I would love to go to one of these things. I don't think it's wrong to have a bunch of Catholics training in phalanx together. It's what we've been doing for longer than America's been around, longer than you and I have been around, Daniel. But where do we go for these kind of things? I'm very curious. Okay. Catholics are taught to love and forgive their enemies. This is true. That to do otherwise is a sin. That is true. But the extremist understanding of spiritual warfare overrides that command. Does it? Does it, Daniel? Do you really find people who genuinely don't rejoice when somebody turns from their sin and embraces the fullness of the truth of Christ? To do battle with Satan, whose influence in the world is, according to Catholic demonology, real and menacing, is to deploy violence for deliverance and redemption. Beg your pardon. What do you mean violence, Daniel? What do you mean in order to combat Satan, whose presence is real and menacing, we have to deploy violence for deliverance and redemption? These are very particular words that you've selected here, and there's absolutely nothing behind them to support them. So what exactly do you mean? The battle beads culture of spiritual warfare permits radical traditional Catholics literally to demonize. This links to another Atlantic article. But I'm out, so I can't even read what it is. Wait, up here. This is evangelical church pastors, political radicalization. That's what this article's little heading up here says. If that's an evangelical thing, why are you talking about it in regards to radical traditional Catholics? Why are you talking about something with evangelicals to Catholics? And by the way, I will say, to be fair, yes, there's an element of the demonic behind actual child sacrifice and killing. Why is this controversial? The Church of Satan put up a tweet when Roe v. Wade was overturned, saying that abortion is a sacrament to the Church of Satan, and if you want an abortion, just join. So how can you be like pinning that this weird battle bead spiritual warfare culture when we actually are seeing a demonic influence, we're seeing a demonic element inside the actual killing of children? I don't want children offered to Moloch. Why is this such a controversial thing? I don't want kids dancing on stripper poles. I don't want kids being exposed to pornography. I don't want kids being groomed by all these wibbly wobbly weird people in public schools. Why is this so controversial? This would have been controversial a decade ago, but now this is all far right positions. But again, this is what I love. I love when journalists do this kind of thing, right? Where they go, okay, I clicked on your link, it leads to a different subculture, but because they're somewhat related, I can make a stretch that says radical traditional Catholics, and somebody who isn't able to discern this is going to take that hook, line, and sinker. That's not good journalism. That's poor journalism. I think this whole article has been an example of poor journalism. Anyway, to demonize their political opponents and regard the use of armed force against them as sanctified. Again, look at this. In the last two sentences here, we've had a lot of very particular Catholic words that have absolutely no reason for being there. We've had deliverance, redemption. We've had sanctified. Who is saying that who is saying right now that armed resistance, armed fighting, armed violence against political people who advocate for abortion is actually now sanctified? It's your God-given duty to go out and shoot people. Who is saying this, Daniel? I've inhabited a lot of different circles. I've inhabited a lot of different circles in traditional Catholicism. I've left some groups. I've gone into some groups. We're about to start a Telegram channel. I would offer you to join, but I don't think it'd be very good for you. I just think it'd be kind of a little too dank for this kind of normie writing. But this is really, really important to me. Where's your sources for such a thing? That's an extraordinarily bold statement. I would like you to be able to tell me who's doing this instead of just some evangelicals I can't even read about saying that there's a demonic element here. The sacramental rosary isn't just a spiritual weapon, but one that comes with physical ammunition. That's a very nice end sentence, but it's not been proven. All you've proven thus far is that there are Catholics who talk about restoration of culture. They don't want to hang out with people who think that sodomy should be celebrated or that children ought to be sexualized. They think that the church is the one true church, and sometimes they put rosary beads on their guns, but they're not terrorists, right? Traditional Catholics aren't committing terrorist attacks or acts of violence. That's y'all's people, not ours. And then, of course, he's a writer in Toronto, Canada. Look, the reality of the world is one of spiritual warfare. And what's good about this article, I'm going to talk about the positive of this article, is that I think that the secularist left, and even the secularist right, the materialists across the whole of our contemporary political, social, and cultural plane are beginning to understand that the methods of how culture has conducted itself for a long time aren't working anymore. And I think that some of them are so terrified by the idea of traditional Catholics because they are a small subculture that's loud, but also they're a self-insulating subculture. Traditional Catholics want to live around other traditional Catholics. We want a Benedict option, essentially, right? We will take our kids out of public schools, right? We will walk away from liberal and poor masses. We will stop reading The Atlantic and watching Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or what have you. We'll stop reading the New York Times and the Washington Post and Salon and all those other places. We'll build our own societies. And by the way, they'll be good societies because we've been legitimately doing it for thousands of years. We don't need the secular liberal democracies that we've been stuck in the last 300 years. There are older ideas that maybe just have to be given another go. I would say that these things can be accomplished without violence. And what I'm worried about is I do think there's a legitimate persecution of the Catholic faith, certainly in the public sphere, but it's moving into the private sphere as well. If you want to be a Catholic politician, you'll be questioned by your beliefs when it comes to sitting on the Supreme Court, or if you're a member of the Knight of Columbus. You'll be celebrated. You'll be called a good Catholic by even popes, by the way, if you don't subscribe to the dogmas, doctrines, and teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. For whatever reason, the American thinks that they can be a Catholic who advocates for pornography, abortion, contraception, divorce, all these other sorts of things, and you could be a good Catholic. You could still receive communion. I think Americans are split, right? There are those who are clearly more the German church, which means that they're just Protestants. And there are those, I think, who are really trying to get back to the element of what the faith is. And the rosary is our guide through this thing. The reason why the rosary is good to lead with, I don't care if we put it on our guns and stuff. I mean, gosh, we're human beings. Maybe we just, especially as guys, maybe we just find that stuff is cool. Kind of a novel thought, isn't it? But there's a good reason why we should say that this is our most powerful weapon. The moment that we lose saying that the rosary is the most powerful weapon, it's a very, very unfortunate time for the church. This was dropped, Daniel, if you want to know about the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. If we would have gone through the 60s and 70s and finally restored a bit in the reign of John Paul II, but if we would have gone through the rosary, Eucharistic adoration, scapular, the other sacramentals, they were dropped. They were completely forgotten about. The tabernacle was pushed to a separate Eucharistic chapel for adoration, not upon the altar. People lost their faith in the millions. They were scandalized. And by the way, now we're 70 years onward from the council. We're 70 years onward from the sexual revolution. We're 70 years onward from the upheaval of last century. And people are miserable. People aren't happy because people are living as materialists. And the Catholic Church, especially here in America, has lived too long as materialists. Sometimes they sprinkle in a light sacramental reality. But the reason why a lot of people are finding joy, not just solidarity, not just dank memes, but actual joy in traditional Catholicism, is because they understand what their soul was made for. They understand deeply the sacramental realities which exist around each and every one of us. And it may result in statements that are so foreign to the contemporary American ear that we don't know what to do with them. It's very casual for Catholics to talk about the church militant. It's very casual for Catholics to talk about spiritual warfare. It's very casual for Catholics to talk about mortification. If you notice on every single rosary, well, not every single rosary, but if you notice on the vast majority of rosaries, what do we have? But we have a corpus. Look at how it's an extraordinarily violent and morbid thing to look at if you don't know what you're looking at. I'm looking at the ultimate sacrifice of love right here. The corpus is Christ, God incarnate himself, Jesus crucified for you and for me, for everybody in the world, that we may come to a fullness of the truth, that we may come to a knowledge of him and his Father through the Holy Spirit. That is what the symbol of the Catholic faith is. Of course, it's going to therefore, it should be good. Traditional Catholics, this is a badge of honor article, because I'm happy that secularists, materialists, believers in liberal Western democracies look at traditional Catholicism and get really, really worried, because that is a system which they broke away from. And it's not just manifesting in the political sphere. It doesn't matter. To be a good traditional Catholic doesn't mean you have to have a monarch, right? You can be a good traditional Catholic in many different forms of government. It's not a matter of politics. And that's something that I don't think the materialists of today really understand. I think that we've hollowed out our own culture so much that, unfortunately, for a lot of people, the culture, the fight between the left and the alt-right and the conservatives and liberals and Democrats and Republicans, that's all that remains. Politics is downstream from culture. But if you have absolutely nothing left in the cultural bank, no wonder we've reduced politics as our sacrament, right? No wonder this article talks about all the leftist talking points that should unite us all as Americans. Well, the problem with traditional Catholics, Rad Trads, is that they're homophobic, they're transphobic, they're isolationist, right? They believe that the world's going to end or society is going to collapse. They'd rather focus in, they'd rather have firearms training, they'd rather have a patriarchal family system. And the answer is all of these things sound extreme because we've so hollowed out our culture. But a lot of these things are just the common ways that every single culture has conducted itself for thousands of years. That is all a Catholic wants to do in the political sphere. Honestly, after the 2020 election, I haven't voted since. Why would I? If I believe, and this, I love how he talks about conspiratorial politics, but generally think about this, right? If I believe that the 2020 election was stolen, I'm not going to vote for a hot second. But you know what I am going to do? I'm going to focus way more in on my community, and my community should be based around my church. It's the old medieval view of things. And it's easy to go, oh, well, it's all just hate blogging and stuff like that. But I don't think you've ever sat down with a beer or a pipe smoke with Catholics who genuinely love Christ and are worried about what future there will be for their children, because the ship is going down, guys, right? If anyone thinks the American experiment is going to last forever and ever, hallelujah, hallelujah, amen, nah, we're kidding ourselves. That's just the nature of empire. And if we don't start thinking, what kind of societies do we want to build? What kind of society should we be allowed to build? That is what the heart of the American experiment is. Then we're going to keep finding ourselves in these unnecessary battles. It is by grace of God Roe v. Wade was overturned. It is by grace of God there are entire states where to kill a child is an offense. It's a terribly difficult thing to do. And it's very sad in contrast when there are states where killing a child has been enshrined, essentially. But I think that as we kind of see everything come apart, right, as we kind of see what the natural conclusion of a secularist, materialist society is, it's very good that we as Catholics can bind together around the symbols and the sacramentals and the sacraments that our ancestors have for thousands of years. That is what makes me a glad trad, right? I don't think any position I hold is particularly radical. I think a lot of it is well thought out. I think a lot of it also is just the natural concurrence of history, right? How do I want my children? What's an optimal way to raise my kids? Hey, can you please not sexualize kids? Ah, well, groomers transphobic, Jordan. Whatever. Only groomers would say that. I mean, and honestly, traditional Catholic, this is all I'm saying to you. There comes a point where it's not worth it to make memes or responses or anything. It's just worth it to live as your ancestors lived. Let the weight of history take its course. Let the truth of Christ's church take its course. Settle down, find your vocation, married life, the priesthood, whatever it is. Get married if that's your choice. Have a family, Want for nothing extravagant. Do not be envious of your neighbor's goods. Do not covet your neighbor's wife. Do not kill. Do not steal. Do not blaspheme. Right? Honor thy father and mother. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Do not place any gods before the Lord God. Follow the 10 commandments. Right? Don't commit adultery. Don't do it. Do these things. Live a life of charity, of sacramental grace, of joy in your soul. Be a glad trad. Don't be a mad trad. And I think that you are going to see that our adversaries, our enemies, and even our friends will be completely confounded by just how much beauty there can be. I'm going to close with this thought. It's really interesting to me that there are so many martyrs who went up to the scaffold, went up to the guillotine, were fed to lions, were crucified, were flayed alive, had their throats slit. A very, very violent faith are we. Persecution all the way. I am worried that persecution, it's already here, but I think it's only going to get worse. It has to get worse. Because with this element of spiritual warfare, I think Satan knows that we're on the cusp of something great. We're on the cusp of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Father Michel Rodrigue talks about, if you believe in visions and these sorts of things. But it's not going to be easy, right? The third secret of Fatima might be playing out in real time, right? It's not going to be easy. But Christ did not call us to have an easy life. Christ calls us, in fact, to suffer in this life for the joys of the next life. That is why Christians will always and should always be extremists to the world. Because the world, flesh, blood, material, that's all there is, the materialists. An article like this makes them worry. They go, uh-oh, these people are getting radicalized. But if you actually sit down and talk to why we do the things that we do, I think you'll realize it's because God has given us our lives. He's given us rights. He's given us freedoms. And he has given us the freedom to serve him. And he's given us the freedom to walk apart from him. God, when we are married, binds us to a sacramental reality. So deep is my marriage that my soul is entwined with my wife. And if in God's providence, children are entrusted to that couple, that is the obligation of mother and father, but especially the father, to lead his children, to lead his wife to heaven. We will be judged on how good or how bad our vocations went. We will be judged on how good or how bad sacramental grace was in our soul. Did we live a life of charity and love? Did we receive baptism? Did we receive communion? Did we go to confession? Did we learn about our faith? Did we pray with the saints, right? Did we pray to the Virgin Mary? Did we love our spouses? Did we live a life for this world? Or did we lead a life for the next world? That's what we're going to be judged about. And it should it should make us very happy to see that the secular world, the materialist world, the atheistic world is starting to pay attention, because that means that Christ's truth is rolling. And that means that Christ's truth, at the end of the day, by grace of the Immaculate Heart, will triumph. Let's close. Maybe you can grab your rosary in hand. Let's close with an Ave. Let's close for peace in the world, right? Let's close for the Immaculate Heart to triumph, for everyone to come to a fullness of the truth. In nomine Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesu. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostri. Amen. Our Lady of the Assumption, pray for us. In nomine Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancti, Amen. God bless you and may He keep you. We'll see you on the next one. Adios.